This thing called the Billy Meier UFO case, we're looking at one of Meier's well over 1,200, primarily daytime, stunningly clear, still irreproducible UFO photos. But this presentation is going to be different than any presentation we've done so far. But while that image is on the screen, I suggest you look at it and see if, for instance, you've been involved with looking into other so-called UFO cases, etc. If you've ever seen one single piece of evidence as stunningly clear and produced prior to any digital technologies, Photoshop, home computers, etc. No digital cameras. This was Meier's photographic and film evidence was all presented, captured and presented using non-digital film, all film technology, okay? And that's important because if you're looking at this and if this is authentic, then you're looking at something that wasn't made on this earth, wasn't made by any of us in any country on earth, and it's here for a reason. So I'm going to title this presentation, The Spiritual Teaching and the Spiritual Teaching People, and we'll get to that because some of what you'll hear between now and when we revisit that idea, you may be wondering why we're calling it spiritual teaching and the spiritual teaching people. So while we are now awash in all the media, all the UFO groups and everything else, with reports of UFOs and claims of alien this and extraterrestrial that, the fact is, from a scientific point of view, the confirmed existence of extraterrestrial life would be the single greatest discovery, most important discovery in all of science and human history, exceeded only by confirmed contact between said extraterrestrials and the people on Earth, or a person on Earth in this case. So let it sink in for a moment that everything you've heard and will continue to hear in the media, online, etc., about aliens and UFOs and extraterrestrials is and still will be absent any conclusive, independently analyzed evidence. In other words, proof beyond a reasonable doubt that it is evidence of actual extraterrestrial life and technologies. So we have to look at what the criteria is for determining the truth, which is the quantity and the quality of the evidence. In 1964, we have what's called the foundational evidence. This is a drawing, an illustration of a woman who goes by the name of Asket and is said to be, according to the information in this case, an extraterrestrial human being who was the second extraterrestrial mentor, teacher for Edward Albert Meier, now known as Billy Meier. And it is also said that while she tutored and mentored him on board her craft, took him into different places and times, that also Meier was very busy, very active, traveling around on Earth, 42 different countries in fact, hitchhiking, going on boats, what have you, and always supporting himself as a young guy, starting, we're going to be dealing with 1964, he's 27 years of age. And he is at that point at the Ashoka Ashram in Marauli, India, where he is studying Buddhism. He was traveling around studying all of the major religions of the world and many other things in different cultures. This is a photograph, again, 1964 photograph, of Asket's craft hovering right around the Ashoka Ashram, as will be the next several photographs. Some are sepia tone like that, some are in pure black and white, but all of them showing a disc-shaped object hovering. Here's a kind of zoom in close-up. And then in this particular photograph, and you may be able to detect that there is, lower right-hand corner, there's a woman who's looking out at the sky. And she was working at the ashram at that time. These 8 lights in the sky, and it's very rare for you to see Billy Meier photographs that are anything but stunningly clear photographs of actual craft. This being an exception when Asket and her people showed up and Meier was there to take the photograph, and they appeared more like lights in the sky. This next photograph, you're seeing what we saw, my partner and I at the time as filmmakers, in 2006 when we were in Billy's office with him, and when we were looking at his photo album, with this particular album having the remaining 11 or 12 photos from India. We'll get into remaining from what number in a moment. But what hopefully you can make out here is in the foreground, just slightly left of center, is a silhouette. This way it will appear to you. It's Billy Meier sitting on the ground with his cowboy hat on in India. Behind his head there is a spire from one of the buildings at the ashram. And in the sky above him, photographed, not painted on, not taped on, not created through special effects, is a cross in the sky, generated as a hologram by Asket, so that Meier could be photographed in this scene in India with this cross in the sky. For right now, we'll leave the reason for this photograph and move on to show you the kind of camera that he was traveling around with, which was a 1940s Kodak bellows type camera. Very primitive camera, film camera. My father had one. When the thing rolls out, and if you're lucky, when you click, and you take the film and to get developed, you're going to get photographs. So all of these preceding items here, they're connected to this article, which I know you can't read clearly from there. But this is an article in the Delhi Statesman, a prominent newspaper that still exists in India, and that at the time this article was written by a very reputable reporter as well. The newspaper had been in existence for well over 100 years. And in this article, the reporter is describing this young vagabond who has a photo album with 80 UFO photos in it, and he describes a number of them, including the cross in the sky. So we have not only these photos taken with that camera, but we have documentation from 1964 in a newspaper that this indeed was presented to this reporter at the time. This makes it the earliest available photographic evidence from the Meier case. But there's more evidence in the case, and Propulsion Cheng, who was an eyewitness to the events in India in 1964 for some time, is now a retired diplomat to the UN from Cambodia as a grown woman. In this photograph, you can see her and her brother flanking their uncle, who was the head monk, grandfather rather, pardon me, the head monk at the ashram. All right, so she was there, the grandfather was there, and in this image, this is taken from a videotape that we have as well in one of our films. Propulsion came forward in the 1990s because people had been contacting her. Once the Meier case was starting to gain some public recognition, people were writing to her saying, wait a minute, Ashoka Ashram, you were there, and what do you know about this? She had put this part of her life, this time in the ashram, kind of behind her. She grew up, she went through her education, and went to the UN. Well, she decided that she needed to come forward and give like a press conference, along with another woman who was also at the ashram at that time. Both of them spoke at this event. And you see Pobo at a lectern, and in the background, one of Meier's photographs, and she's describing where on the property this was taken. And she explained for quite some time all about the sightings that people had. There were well over 100 people at the ashram who, like her, saw the craft, saw Meier, saw Asket, often walking around with Meier on the grounds. And Asket would, she said, sometimes come into her room at night right before she was falling asleep and would sing to her or whatever. And in the morning, she said, I'd wake up and I felt like I knew a lot more than when I went and fell asleep at night.
So this ship would appear, usually would be around the same time as I have the visitation, or sometime this was taken by Billy Meier. I would see it once a week or sometime twice a week, ship over the Ashoka Ashram, but from an angle behind the Ashoka Ashram, there's a little hill, and we used to call it the Dog Hill. This was taken on May 24, 1964. This was taken just on the side towards the east of the ashram. Sometimes I would see more than two, there would be a whole bunch of them. Taken from monuments in that area. It's called the Qutub Minar. This is an old Indian historical monument. Very interesting and also important to me, a whole bunch of them. But this is one of my ayah washing my clothes, sitting on the veranda outside my room. When I had my experience, I have seen a lot of ships over the trees, near the well, on the doghouse. Sometimes it was very low. I could see a huge half of this room size of the ship. So when I had experiences with Asket, it was also not something very unusual or strange for me. It was almost a return to some familiar state. Sometimes there would be a few villagers walking around and they would look up and see this. In the ashram itself, sometimes our servant would come and said, I saw something very strange. Have you seen? I would say yes, and that was the end of it. This is right on top of the ashram in the evening. Sometimes there would be people looking up with me, looking up, and some of them would see the ship very clearly like myself, but some would look at them and said, I don't see it. This is one of the phenomena where hundreds of people saw this. Even was written in the Indian newspaper in the 60s. Actually, one reporter was dispatched from the newspaper, I think the New Statesman or something. He came, talked to the villagers, talked to people who work at our place, and even talked to Billy and was shown the photos.
Propulsion, then, a few years after she gave that public presentation, was interviewed in New York City, and around that time she and her husband went to Switzerland to meet with Billy again. She had not seen him 36 years or whatever, all that time. And they spent days together going back over their memories and recalling the events that she was privy to. And she also went and visited India. She went to the ashram. There's a video online about that. So what we have in what I call the foundational evidence in this Billy Meier case, we have 80 original UFO photos that were seen by a reporter and described. About 11 of those originals still remain, including the one with the cross in the sky and lights and craft, and still living credible eyewitnesses. As a matter of fact, in our film, The Silent Revolution of Truth, we brought in a man who, for the U.S. military, teaches reading of body language for people who are special forces or Army Rangers, what have you, because people who are in high stress, high-level military positions, combat positions, have to be able to, as best they can, assess when another human being is present that they're not expecting or they're encountered, how quickly they can assess whether that person's a threat or not. Now, that's not always 100%, but this man taught that. And so he came in and I wanted him to assess Billy Meier and Propulsion. So I had him watch videos of both of them speaking with no sound. So he would not be commenting, knowing anything about what they were speaking about. He was unaware of who Billy Meier was anyhow. And the assessment, as we have it reported by him in our film, was both of these people appear to be credible. They are saying what they are believing to be true. There's no evidence of deception or lying.
She seems like her body language is congruent. So it's in other words, when she's speaking, her hands move with whatever is going on. She's saying, I remember this. Typically, if I was lying, I wouldn't throw something like that in because I'm trying to get through it as quick as possible. So she goes into little snippets of the story. I would say that the way she's presenting it, either she's rehearsed it really well or she's telling what she believes in.
Irgendwo hingeflogen, wo wir uns unterhalten konnten und wo ich lernen konnte.
Neurolinguistic programming, neuro standing for how you take the world in through your five senses. Linguistic is how that is communicated internally to you. And then programming is how do we change those internal communications so that we can take the world in differently. NLP was started in 1975, basically modeling some therapists. And now, today, it's really used much more as far as in the business community. So the skills of neurolinguistic programming are pretty much pervasive in healthcare and education in a lot of different places. What I'm noticing here is that he is looking down to his right a lot. And when people look down to their right, very often they're accessing emotions. They're accessing aspects of what's going on from an emotional sense. He's also looking down a little bit to his left, which would be his analytical mind. So, but most of this is looking down to his emotional self. It looks like he's talking pretty slow at a nice pace, so that would be congruent with him speaking from his heart. His eyes, however, are blinking quite a bit, and that could be an indication, as far from a body language point of view, that he's actually not being congruent, that there's some nervousness there. However, if he is intelligent, that also may account for that and counter it.
The tape is taken back to be analyzed by Bob Phelan, a former criminal investigator with the Sheriff's Department of Colorado and a specialist in lie detection.
It was also a yes answer. Number 3, do you live in Switzerland? Yes, he lives in Switzerland. There's enough stress here to indicate that probably isn't where he prefers to live, or he's lived someplace else. Question 4 was the first relevant question you asked him, is have you taken the photographs of spacecraft? His answer was yes. He's being extremely forceful, though not deceptive. And my opinion on that particular question is that he's being as truthful as possible. Number 7 was the second relevant question you asked him, and he answered right on top of the question. And the person asking the question had asked him to answer the question again, and then he asked the question again. The stress levels between the two diminished the second time that the question was asked, which is not indicative of deception, because stress builds in a deceptive pattern. It doesn't diminish. If it was a deceptive answer, the stress would then increase, not decrease. Now, something was extremely interesting to me was the 8th question you asked him on, do you drink coffee? And for some reason, he's more stressful on the statement about coffee than he is about the picture of the spacecraft.
Yeah, that makes sense, because about 3 days before we tested Meier, he promised his wife he'd stop drinking coffee, but we noticed he'd been sneaking a few occasionally.
Okay, that could probably be the account for it then.
Phelan reviews the tape several times. He could find no evidence of deception in the statements about Meier's experiences.
Now, about 16 months ago, I got a phone call on a Saturday morning. A kind of gruff-sounding guy said, I'm Joe. You Michael? I said, yeah. You willing to talk to me about this Billy Meier case? I said, yeah, I am, Joe. What do you do? I'm an investigator. Let's leave it at that for now. Okay. So Joe and I, for about 3 months, the phone would ring like clockwork, 8:30 Saturday morning, and I found out that that was a good time for Joe because he lives in the East. He lives in Asia. He does not live any longer in the U.S. And he said, look, I think this could be a hoax, but I want to see what you can tell me, and I'm going to figure this out for myself. 3 months, we go back and forth, and at a certain point, Joe, I don't know, something ticks him off. And he says, okay, I'm telling you now. Okay. 6 months almost later, 5.5, 6 months later, Saturday morning, 8:30, the phone rings, and it's Joe. And Joe tells me just a little bit about who he is. He tells me that he's the former top level case supervisor for the United States Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigation, which is a department tasked with protecting national security of the United States, among other things, and among other organizations that contribute to that. Between 67 and 71 or so, he supervised hundreds of investigations. That means of people who were aspiring to higher office, or to even higher office, who could end up with their fingers on the nuclear trigger, people who were in the military, who may be looking to be promoted further. They wanted to vet everybody very thoroughly, and they were also looking to detect moles and spies. And Joe, who told me he was an expert in all this, proved it to me by sending me photographic evidence of all of his recommendations and all the praise you could heap on anybody from the military, all the appropriate seals. So he was who he said he was. And he said to me that based on the 1964 evidence, some of which you've just seen, the Meier case, the Billy Meier case, is 100% authentic, ironclad. And on top of that, he said, I'll take on any skeptics that want to debate it. I said, well, that's an interesting thing to say, Joe. You determined this how? He said, well, as I said, I looked at all that information from 1964, and here's the thing. You've got a credible reporter at a reputable newspaper, and he's seen an album with 80 UFO photographs taken in the middle of nowhere in India by essentially a vagabond with very primitive equipment. I want to know where he could have gotten those 80 UFO photos if he didn't take them himself. I don't want theories. I don't want people to tell me that he bought them from UFOs that are on the street in India in 1960. Where did he get those photos? And you still have them? We can look at them. And then he said, I also looked into Propulsion. I found documentation online. She indeed was a UN diplomat. Fine record. She's who she says she is. On top of that, he said, I looked further into the case, and there was a special effects director whose name was Wally Gentleman. Wally Gentleman was the special effects director for Stanley Kubrick's 2001, a film made before some of your time, and other people here may recall it. And Kubrick hired him because he was about the best in Hollywood at the time. That was a very groundbreaking movie for the time. And Wally Gentleman was shown one of Meier's films, the first film that Meier took in 1975. He was asked then, can you duplicate this film? Can you explain this film? And he said, I can duplicate that film. It'll take, let's say, well, altogether it would cost about $80,000. I need a crew of 15 people. We have to get cranes and make large, all this. He said, you're telling me this was shot by a one-armed guy with a film camera? He says, there's no hoax here. He says, everything is correct about it. The light, the movement, and all that. So unless this is some real genius at work that we don't know anything about, you're looking at something that's authentic. We would require tens of thousands of dollars back in 1980. Nowadays, yes, you can do this with CGI. I went to the Academy Award-winning special effects people from, what was the film? Oh yeah, Independence Day. Now you're talking about relatively state-of-the-art special effects, not relying on big models or anything outside you. So these two guys, Mark and Engel, I think are their names, I said, okay, can you do this? Same thing, just like had been asked of all the gentlemen before. And they said, well, yeah, we could do it, but we'd have to use CG. You'd have to be hanging some huge thing on a crane and wires. Notice the distance between the tree, the craft, and the sky. This is a close-up where it's zoomed in. Watch the top of the tree. It moves under the backwash of the craft. Maybe we can look at that again from the beginning and see what we get. The ship actually hangs for about 3 seconds to the side at an angle before it starts moving. This is Meier's first film. It was a rainy, snowy day, he said. Weather conditions weren't good, and he was quite a distance away, so here we have it zoomed in. Recently, an independent investigation on this film was done by Raul Zahi. One of the interesting things that was found was that in one of the frames, the ship in one of the frames is in 2 places at the same time. MUFON, exopolitics, towards the Stars Academy. Anybody want to talk to us about the Billy Meier? The Pentagon, they spent $110 million. They couldn't find this. Isn't that funny? What are we talking about here? We're talking about photographs like this. And a series of photographs where the craft was kind of parked temporarily in one spot in front of a tree and then moved around the tree. Meier was closer and farther away at different times. You could see the reflection of the sky, the tree, clouds, etc. Just go back over these photos. That's a stunning photograph. It's a real tree. We've actually, years ago, had forestry experts from OSU, Oregon State University, look at these photos, and we said, forget the shiny silver thing. What about the tree? Models, miniatures, or real? Oh no, those are full-size real trees. You've got that nesting going on at the top, and in some of the other photos you can see there's pruning marks. Nobody makes miniature trees like that. Those are real. And they had the species, Albes something or other. Okay, so you also have, this is a frame from one of Meier's films. 3 of the craft are in the sky. The 2 smaller ones are kind of bobbing around to the side, and then they disappear. And the film goes on, and the other one's staying in the center. And then, of course, we have the photos where Meier has photographed 2 of the craft from above Switzerland, from inside the craft. Another one from inside the craft. This is a rather famous photograph, among many, because when it was analyzed independently, again, people say, oh, it's got to be miniature trees. Well, the branches are in front of the object. So if that turns out to be a real tree, that means that object is about 23 feet in diameter. No strings. Now we'll see if we can get this to play for you. You're not going to hear the sound all that clearly, but I'll tell you what it is. You have people looking at those photographs I just showed you, the one, the sunlight shot with the tree, and they look across the field, and there's the tree in full bloom on the hillside. The man on the left is a director for Nippon TV. He's with Billy Meier on the right. And they're trudging their way up towards the tree. Now, just keep an eye on these guys as they retreat into the distance and then start to get a sense of scale of their size compared to the tree. They're not all the way there yet. And Meier, in this, what you're not hearing is he's describing where he was, and how the sun was, and all the rest of it. Now, as you can see, we go back to this, there it is. You can see, based on the size of these 2 guys, now, that tree is approximately 40 feet in height. They just keep on getting smaller, and there's the tree. And he talks about how much time he had to film it. Has Stephen Greer ever showed you this? No. Why? What about exopolitics? Or our friends at MUFON? Never showed you this? Chasing lights in the sky? Is that what we're supposed to do? I don't think so. Unfortunately, you can hear some of the dubbed-in music here that I don't know why they put it. But watch the upper right-hand side of the ship at the top of the... Watch, there's a light, and there's a light. Broad daylight. Meier has zoomed in on the craft. The light goes on again. And now the sounds that you probably will be able to hear are the sounds he recorded using an Iowa tape recorder. 4 different occasions he recorded the sounds with about 17 people present, including an undercover policeman. Here comes the ship again. Catch the lights. Broad daylight, 1976.
Billy, this We're using this to measure distance. It's the latest in infrared measuring devices.
Yes.
It's actually a small computer. It's made by Wild Heerbrook here in Switzerland. And what we're trying to do here, Lee is up there with the reflector.
Yep.
And what this will do is send infrared light out and reflect out of that reflector back here. And this will rapidly tell us the distance and will also tell us how much higher or lower he is.
That's about where you're standing, right there.
That's right, the place, yes. Okay, we'll go to on systems. Yes, we've got 1,262 feet, 0.85.
The precise measurements and photos are fed into the computer. The edges of known objects, such as the trees and the hills, are translated into pixels. Since these measurements are known, the number of pixels in the edge of the unknown object, the craft, gives its distance. The beam ship is determined to be just where Meier said it was. Simple triangulation then gives its size, 7 meters, or about 21 feet in diameter.
Measuring the edges of things and comparing it to all the other edges in the pictures. Based on the relationship of those edges? The width of the edges and the properties in the edges. So we're stretching the data in the edges so we can count how many pixels wide it is. And it's very interesting what happens when you stretch them out, because it becomes very clear. Pixels, these little squares, like building blocks, and pretty easy to count. So we have our range here is from 6 to 8. Now what this tells us in looking at all the edges on the object is, first of all, that it's not a flat piece of plywood hung in the air, or it's not a paste-up that was done. It actually has shape to it. And in this case, a very wide range, which has to do with focus. Some of the object is more in focus than other parts of the object, which tells me right off at that point that we're dealing with something of size to it.
To test the possibility that the Meier photographs were made using small-scale models suspended by transparent monofilament, the investigators bring with them a detailed model of a beam ship they identify as Variation 2. While Welsh flies the model on a hilltop above the farmhouse, Meier and Stevens snap several rolls of film. The camera Meier is using is the same one with which he took all the other pictures. The results are impressive.
So when we look at models, there's a variety of things that are different than when we look at photographs of these objects. Load in some colors first. That object right there is solid. It's one solid color. There's very little contour in it compared to other objects that are in the photograph, like the trees and things that we have color mapped in the background to be high contrast colors. So we're going from the brown object to the horizon. It takes 2 pixels. I mean, you can count it with your finger. You don't even need a computer. Why is that important? What does it mean? There's no contour to the object. Remember when we looked at the other photographs that were taken by Meier, the width of the edges ranged from 4 to 9. Point of the story. This is a small model. It's easy to tell small models. We don't really have to test every picture anymore to see if it's a real picture or not. We can't find anything that tells us it's a hoax, so let's start looking for things that are interesting. We get some kind of an aura, whether it's infrared, thermal energy, as yet I don't know. Look at the color here. It seems to contour to the shape of the craft. Have you seen this in a lot of the other photographs? In the Meier case, no. I think that craft is putting out a force field. What we're seeing here is that the film grain holds up the way that it should. In the pixel distortion test, it appears to me and to the computer that this object was photographed in the same original piece of film at the same time that the background was photographed. In other words, no overlay. I would say these pictures are genuine.
The wedding cake UFO. Everybody said, oh, that's got to be a garbage can lid with Christmas tree bulbs on it. I see. We have a video, this which we're not showing today, where Meier is about 600 feet away, and this is one of the zoomed in photos he took of it while the video pans in and out, back and forth. A closer look at it. Notice at the bottom, left-hand side of the tree, a pruning of a branch, kind of irregular branch. It's not a miniature. A couple more detailed photos of the craft in different locations. Well, by golly, it's set down in Billy's front yard. He was 15 feet away from it here. 15 feet away from it. The Pentagon couldn't find it. These are some of the details. There's a guy in England who made a model, this very good model, but couldn't duplicate all the details. But he tried. This is kind of interesting and famous as well. And I'll show you something you can compare here. I was pointing to the globes and the rim right above them around the craft. Now, notice that right above the rim begins that contoured part, that dome type of point. However, when we zoom in on the craft here at night, that part of the craft has expanded. There's now more space in there for whatever reason. But of course, the skeptics said, well, this is nothing but a golden model photographed against a black curtain. Despite all this lovely detail work, a lot of detail, but anyhow, we have this wonderful glowing gold UFO. When Raul Zahi did an analysis of the wedding cake craft as well, he put one of these 35mm film photos that you can pluck right off of the internet into Photoshop. And he adjusted contrast up, I think, and brightness down, vice versa. And what he saw then was this. That this is a large object that is hovering over a gravel road. There's a white post marker there. It's like they have in Switzerland. They're about a meter high, these markers on the road, and the grassy hillside. Just from dropping that black and white photo into Photoshop, suddenly the whole argument about a gold model against a black curtain goes away. A fellow in Hong Kong did the same thing, just adjusted differently. And he got to look like this. Both of the photos show a kind of energy field. Different colors from the top up there, you can see it. I even had it displayed in Times Square. About 15 seconds worth or so, with a press release that I put out. And Raul Zahi also wrote this wonderful book, this analysis of the wedding cake UFO, where they deal with the reflections in the globes and everything, and they use Google Earth for triangulating the space on the ground. And basically, we're dealing with possibly two craft, one 14 feet in diameter and one over 20 feet in diameter.
Perhaps the best way to know the diameter of these UFOs that seem to come in different sizes is by looking at the reflection of their spheres. The spheres that these ships have reflect the surroundings. If we know what is behind the photographer, in this case behind Billy, and we know the size of the object behind him, these reflections can tell us if the object is near or far. For this, we use the geometry laws of reflections of light rays on spherical surfaces. When Billy took the first pictures of the wedding cake UFO, he was located on his yard, in front of his home. In this panoramic picture from a postal, you may see at the right the main house, and at the left the carriage house. When this picture was taken, in 1981, there were no tall trees around. By observing this picture, and knowing the focal length of Billy's camera, the researchers found that he was located in the point indicated in this plan view, close to the carriage house wall. Billy's house is located on the right. This is a recent view of the carriage house taken from the parking yard. And this is a composition of how it would have looked back in 1980. So geometry allows us to know if Billy took a picture of a scale model close to his camera, or of a bigger ship hovering on his yard at a longer distance. These are the spheres of this UFO, shown in the picture, and one can see the reflection of the carriage house on the spheres in wide-angle spherical view, and somewhat blurred. Doing mathematical calculations, and based on the size of the carriage house wall, and making geometrical projections, the researchers found out that this wedding cake UFO is more than 2 meters in diameter. The details of this investigation can be found on the website of Professor Jim Dedorf.
And then Meier, of course, took this kind of photo of what's called the energy or light ship. And naturally, the skeptics say it's a double exposure, it's a fluorescent light. However, it turns out when Zahi and I think Chris Locke do their analysis, they find that this is a rather interesting thing. There's no manipulation outside. One of the photos is an in-camera triple exposure, but the rest are simply photographs of this strange object that takes various sizes and shapes, radiates light. Some of the light only goes so far. Very unusual thing. Billy Meier, the one-armed guy hanging out there in the hills, didn't apparently make that. Well, that's interesting evidence, and do we have any other evidence? Yes, of course, we have the sound recordings, we have metal samples.
The fragments are given to chemist Marcel Vogel, an expert in crystalline structures and inventor of many substances used in computer components.
The first specimen I looked at is a metal specimen, which I classified as F1 light. What is unusual of this small specimen is both highly crystalline nature, and suddenly we come to a metal section as we see here, and it showed a combination of metals that I've not encountered in any normal bit of metallurgy, both crystalline deposits and metal. Now, we, with any technology that I know of, could not achieve this on this Earth plane. I could not explain the type of material that I have and its discreteness by any known combination of materials. I could not put it together myself as a scientist. If I were to take these combinations and put it into a furnace, melt it, then pour it out and pull a little ingot, I would see all of these elements present there in any one area. But I don't. I see this discrete bits of material. Now, it can only happen by some form of a cold fusion process where you have the elements present and you fuse them together so they still maintain their identity, but they interpenetrate into one another. It's also a challenge because I showed it to one of my friends who was a metallurgist, and he shook his head. He said, I don't see how it can be put together. And that's the way we are right now. And I think it's important that those of us who are in the scientific world sit down and do some serious study on these things instead of putting it off as figments of people's imagination. And we find that in this area there is evidence of machining, that there are striations which look like the sample has been worked mechanically. It doesn't look like anything that we've made here. At this moment I would feel very much inclined to accept what was given to me as being true.
Listen here. Wow, you recorded that here? My wife recorded this one here, and in the meantime I've been there down very standingly with the auto recorder. You had another recorder down there. How high was the ship above you? About 60 meters.
60 meters. How far would you estimate it is from here down there today?
I think some 300 meters.
The sounds bear no resemblance to anything Stevens has heard before. Meier gives him both tapes for analysis. The tapes are taken to electronics consultant Niels Rognerud and sound engineer Steve Ambrose for examination.
We have two pieces of equipment. One measures the signal we're listening to in the time domain, the top one here. And the bottom one is measuring the frequency components of the signal.
Yeah, what does this mean when they're all together like that?
What you have is you have many tones happening at the same time, and right now they're aligned. Now they're disaligning. They're out of alignment. They're very much out of alignment. Now they're starting to centralize on one. It's not as though maybe before you had 10 different frequencies at random and then all of a sudden 9 dropped out and you only had 1 left. What's happening is the 10 different frequencies are converging on one central frequency, which is, I find, very interesting. This is probably one of the most interesting things about the tape is that there are...
What's this right now?
Very, very many tones.
Yeah.
And they're all changing very fast.
For a moment there, we were looking in and we had 3 evenly spaced frequencies. See it there again?
Yeah, you got them again.
Yeah.
Niels, would it be possible to recreate this sound?
To be honest with you, I personally don't think so.
There are not synthesizers on the market that have oscillators that change that randomly. Even if you got 9 or 10 of them going, they wouldn't change from those peaks that quickly.
So a significant thing is this rate of change.
Well, and besides, if you were going to create a noise for a spaceship, you'd be hard put to come up with something as original as this. There's another alignment there.
Okay, Lee, what we can do here is...
Intrigued by the findings, Lee Elders takes the tape to Robin Shellman, who has studied the sounds of the earlier craft.
We're showing this throbbing, modulating beat that we hear on the tape. This beat, or modulation, occurs at these frequency peaks. Each one of these peaks is a discrete frequency. If you wanted to give a visual display, let's say we're talking a motor. Could be a motor, a shaft of a motor with 4 magnetic poles or coils around this shaft. The curious thing about this, it changes from 4 to 5, 6, 7, all the way up to a number that is difficult to discern. At a certain point, you're going to generate a certain amount of magnetism. And then later on, you want a stronger field, well, you're going to select 8 fields. All right, now you're going to hear 8 pulses on the tape. And then later on, you want a stronger field, you can select 16, 32.
Is there anything unusual about this?
I would think it's highly unusual. I don't really see any application for it, with the exception of, like I say, either generating a magnetic wave of some sort for laboratory purposes or maybe in this case, propulsion.
Without ever having seen a picture of the new beam ship, Shellman has drawn a representation of the spheres and offered an explanation of their function. The tapes hold still another surprise.
And also, another interesting point to note here is we have there seems to be a steady pattern all throughout all of this random signal. It seems to be level change very steadily in around 5 to 10 cycles per second, which happens to be in the area of the natural magnetic resonance of Earth, also called the Schumann resonance.
Is that significant in any way?
It could be. It's just interesting to note the correlation there.
The peculiar correlation is something strange.
I mean, why would the correlation be there?
Yeah.
You can see it on the oscilloscope.
Meier says the beam ships can ride the magnetic field of the Earth. Rognerud's findings seem to bear this out.
And then back in about 2006, I heard from some folks in London at a media company who had heard about Billy, and they wanted to interview him. They said 15 minutes with Billy would be great. I said, well, I'm going to be over there in a few weeks. Why don't we meet? So they came in, and at about an hour and 20 minutes into the 15-minute interview, one of the folks over there walked in Billy's office and said, well, why don't you show them the handprints on the car? Oh, yeah, that's right. Good idea, Billy said. So we all march out to one of the parking lots where Meier's stepson, Atlant, had parked his little Subaru station wagon, little thing. And we see this. On the right, we see Billy Meier's hand. And just for clarity's sake, in case you don't make it out, thumb, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That makes 7 fingers. Here, from elbow to hand, etched into the finish of this car. Handprints, the papillary lines are etched right into the finish of the car. Lasted for at least 4 years every time I was over there. And people are going, what the heck is this? How did this get made? This is someone else, obviously, with these little smear marks all over his car. And this isn't the only car they did it on. There was a couple other cars. Well, Meier says what he found out is that these handprints belong to the people, a couple people, from another race. They're not the Plejaren extraterrestrials that Meier meets with, but they're a race that is involved in their federation who work with the Plejaren. And the Plejaren were off on some vacation, I don't know, in some part of the universe. And so these two folks were doing the monitoring of the craft, of the grounds, actually, in Switzerland, that is usually done by the Plejaren. They have a rather corrosive to us body chemistry. When Meier first was introduced to them, it was on one of the large craft, and he wanted to shake hands with this little guy. He said they're slightly greenish tinged skin, and they're small, they're human beings. And he was reaching out to shake hands, and Ptah, the father of Semyaze, who was his main contact person from 1975 on for a while, said, I don't recommend that you do that. He says, well, why not? He says, well, their skin's a little different than you. He says, well, can we just touch fingers? He says, oh, of course. So Billy said, for 1 week, this finger burned really badly. They really have a different body chemistry. So Linda Moulton Howe, I think some of you know her name. She's an investigator, and she contacted me about bringing scientists over to Switzerland to examine this evidence on this car. And Billy said, yes, of course, that's fine. You just please do not destroy the cars. Well, Linda Moulton Howe, for some reason, never got her scientific friends to Switzerland. I think she was busy promoting more imaginary alien mutilations and things. It's a great career to have when you can't prove or disprove anything. So we come back to this idea, the confirmed existence of extraterrestrial life. Well, what does that mean in this case? It means we have 6 at least categories of physical evidence. We have thousands of pages of informational evidence. We are going to touch on some of that today, but in a different way than we've ever done before. So the contact with this man on Earth, for those who want to just think through the logic like Joe Tisk, my friend from overseas, did, leads us to conclude that based on the evidence, there's a preponderance of evidence that's authentic. That is disturbing to certain people and organizations, and you may not know, but one of the people who's on my research team is the former Director of Operations Vice President at Orbital Flight Systems in Tucson area, Arizona. And he has a friend who's still working at Orbital, a former federal, well, he's done a lot of work in aerospace and military and weapons development stuff. And basically, one of the MUFON field directors approached him to recruit him to join MUFON, because here's a guy very credible, he's already got all sorts of clearances. But what bothered this fellow was, and this is the quote from Ken, Most of MUFON's public information was intentionally bogus or redacted. The US State Department and the CIA basically control this activity. So the good folks, and I mean that sincerely, who do pursue trying to find out what the UFOs are that they're seeing and all, are basically doing free research for the secret military programs whose craft account for 98% of any actual craft that are seen in the skies, especially in America. You are looking at secret military craft, and you're reporting on how it appears, you're showing whatever photos or films you have, so that the development of these craft, for the sake of whatever types of effects, visibility or non-visibility, can be worked on and perfected. That's what's happening. Now, Billy Meier was specifically warned about MUFON's existence. He was told in 1953, it's about 16 years before it was actually founded, and that there would be an organization founded in the United States that would be his greatest adversary, that would work against him the most strenuously. Some of you may know Jan Hartson, who I think is a very nice fellow. I know him, director of MUFON. And he admitted to me that he knows the Meier case is real. But they are not going to focus on it or investigate it or anything else. So let's stop and consider the singular historical significance. The next time you hear anything about UFOs, aliens and extraterrestrials and abductions in the Air Force and the Pentagon and all the rest of it, think about it. The most important question to ask is, what is the reason for the Billy Meier UFO contacts? And let's acknowledge this. I am personally unaware of anybody in the so-called UFO field, the so-called experts and organizations, that really present for consideration, other than some loony thing about we've got to protect against an alien attack and all that. I don't hear anybody saying, well, assuming that there really is extraterrestrial contact, etc., what is the reason for it? Why would any beings come, perhaps millions of light years, to Earth, to allow their craft to be photographed, to meet with somebody and have lengthy conversations with him since he's 5 years of age, and still carry that on 76 years later when he's 81 years of age? Why would that happen? Well, the reason for the Meier contacts isn't for us to chase lights in the sky or to create careers for UFO experts. I actually do other things in my life. And if I want to refer to myself that way, and I do sometimes just to irritate people, I say, well, I'm the world's leading expert on UFOs. Why? Well, while many people have seen stuff in the sky, I've had 7 sightings, but I've been 20 feet away from one of the small play-arm monitoring craft. None of the UFO experts have been anywhere near any actual animated craft. I've received specific information, prophetically accurate information, from the play-arm, warning me of a trap being set for me and Meier and our work by a fellow named Cal Korff. Date stamp, time stamp, we've got it on my website. I received that information from them, requesting that I pay attention and maybe not pursue a project that Cal Korff was also generously inviting me to participate in. Several days after I received that and had sent Cal emails back and forth, finally he understood that I wasn't going to participate, and then he did what the play-arm said he was getting ready to do. He launched 300 specific attacks on his website, which formerly had been like a love fest. He's throwing flowers up in the air about how nice a person I am, and we're going to do all this project together. Suddenly, horrific attacks, especially against Meier, me, death threats. 3 different web hosting companies, when approached with what they took his site down. That's how bad it was. So I received information, forwarded to me, not directly from, forwarded to me by Meier from the play-arm. I am trying to figure out, let's say another consideration is that I represent the only scientifically proven case. So I've invited all the UFO experts. I've invited Nick Pope and Richard Dolan and Stephen, all the rest of them said, would you like to debate it? Because you are all actively either speaking against it or ignoring and suppressing it. Let's have a discussion. None of them want to talk about the Billy Meier case. You're here today, courtesy of these people here, for free, because we feel it's important enough. Go wherever we can, and when the situation is such that people will come, we'll do a free event because you get to see for free what all your organizations, what your government, let alone the UFO people, don't want you to know about. So the reason for the Meier case is so that we'll discover the truth. And the truth, ladies and gentlemen, as we will move into it today, can be rather harsh. Rather harsh. We ain't seen nothing there. The reason is also, at its core, to help us to assure our own very threatened future survival. If beings who can get here come here, and according to their own agenda insert into our world all the evidence that any human being capable of thinking would require in order to discover the truth about this case, let alone other things we'll dip into, maybe we want to know that reason. Maybe we want to understand what they have been warning for 70 years in printed material. What we're facing as human beings on Earth, whether we like it or not. Believe me, this presentation is certainly not about a popularity contest, as you will soon find out. So I'm actually recommending that from this point on, effectively, forget about UFOs. There's nothing you can do with it. It's not going to take you or me anywhere. Concern yourself with what Meier and the Plejaren have long been warning us about, and that which is unfolding right now before, indeed, our very, very, very sleepy eyes. On this world, right now, on Earth. And how that will relate to the title of this presentation, The Spiritual Teaching and the Spiritual Teaching People. So let's go into some of the information that is a matter of record, verifiably published long ago, copyrights establish it. And we'll go through some of the things that are part of the harsh truth. And maybe, based also on our awareness of some of the events of the past couple days or so in time, we will now start putting the pieces together. In 1987, Billy Meier published something called the Prophecies. Now, I say he published it in 1987, but right now I'm going to tell you that it was not authored in 1987. However, I'm telling you that in accordance with what I like to say, which is according to the information in the case. We can more easily prove that it was only created and published in 1987. That's easy. So the next part is, well, it's one of those unprovable things, because the Prophecies refer to Henoch we know as Enoch. That name of a prophet, biblical or even pre-biblical prophet, Enoch. He published a lot of prophecies, very specific prophetic information. You are looking at some that we're going to go into. However, he composed this information over 10,000 years ago. When it was presented to Meier, it was presented in contemporary terms in the German language to Billy Meier and then translated. I've bolded certain parts of these passages. Truly with this stuff, I could have bolded everything, and then we would, we wouldn't be just focused on a couple of things. One of the things is, if we go just to the second paragraph, in all America will play the most decisive role. When in the guise to strive for peace and to fight against terrorism. It invades many countries of the earth, bombs and destroys everything, and brings thousandfold deaths to the populations. Well, if you do know the history of our interactions, aggressions, etc., around the world since 1947 alone, you'll know that our country, the U.S., has, well, let's see, it's over 200 unprovoked acts of aggression on its checklist against people, by definition, unprovoked, who never did anything to us. However, they had things we want. So we either overthrew their democratically elected governments, we assassinated people, we installed governments, we put our military in countries, we established corporations there, we started to mine and export. Everything has two sides to it. We can live in a great country, but those people who may be operating in the shadows, who have agendas other than those that are commonly accepted as our values, to be a good people and a country that welcomes people, all those things. It doesn't matter what country you're in. Every country has the good, the bad, and the ugly. We live here, and there are consequences for everything. So when they say that the military politics of the USA will likewise know no limits, we're focused on building and operating a worldwide police force, and then below that, but that will not be enough, and in the guise of a so-called peaceful globalization. This is written at the latest in 1987, before anybody's talking about globalization. They already knew this long ago. How'd they know it? A couple ways. One, the prophets who worked with the Pleiaren, which include Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, a man named Emmanuel, who was that was the real name of a man whose name we changed later through religion to Jesus Christ, for whom you can never find any history. It's only in the New Testament. And maybe one or two other religious texts. Muhammad. Those were actual, genuine contactee prophets with the Pleiaren, and they all brought the same information, same teaching, which we'll get to. But in every case, it was corrupted. The prophets themselves were either, nailed up or attacked, or their lives were falsified. We're told that Muhammad was marrying 9-year-old girls when, at least according to the Pleiaren information, no. He was a champion of women's rights. How come that got left out? Well, what about all the attacks from, radical Islam? They're not Muslims. They're radical Islamists. There is a difference. We won't be encouraged to learn about the differences between things, because the agenda here is to just roll over everybody. And this is apolitical in the sense that there's nothing partisan politically. Are we singling out the U.S.? Well, if you read all the Meier material, you're going to find out that they are equal opportunity offenders. They got something bad to say about just about everybody and their crazy policies. But we live here. I'm focusing on us. War with Russia, the possibility that a third world war could develop if human beings as a whole will not finally reflect upon reason. So we talk here, you see the USA will gain predominance over all these other countries and peoples, but that ain't going to last forever. At first, many countries will howl with the wolves due to fear of American aggressions and sanctions. Sanctions. Haven't we been trying to impose sanctions on Iran and Iraq and Russia, who's never done anything to this country? Now, did we have to agree with communism? Of course not. If there were people here trying to infiltrate, you deal with it. But Russia didn't bomb us. They haven't invaded us. They didn't launch a bunch of missiles into our country as retaliation for something. What were we retaliating in Syria for? Nobody sent anything our way. But we're retaliating because we're being conditioned all the time to accept aggression. But we're not being told about the other side of that. The other side of that, there's something called the law of cause and effect. It's immutable, it's a dumb law. It doesn't care. It goes, what goes out comes back. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, blah, blah, blah. So there comes a time when the pendulum that has gone out comes back, and sometimes it comes back as a wrecking ball. So there's telling us that there is going to be a turning away, a turning against the U.S. from many Asian, African, and European states. A turning away from the USA. Now, if all of this irrationality continues, if we, find another reason to up the ante and more provocation, a third world war will be inevitable. Remember, we started off here, the spiritual teaching people in a UFO case. You're not going to hear this unpleasant stuff in the UFO community for the most part, unless they start copying the Meier material. This is a problem because they specifically, in this document, Enoch, he was referring to this country. He describes it in a way that's as clear to the player what he's talking about. That it just creates destruction here because we, and not you and I, the country, the policies of what they may call deep state, military-industrial complex, whatever, creates enormous hatred against the country, and we are its citizens. And if you go down to the last line, that is in this document, the destruction of the WTC, i.e. the World Trade Center by terrorists, will only be the beginning. And you go one paragraph up. As a result, America will experience enormous catastrophes which will reach proportions barely imaginable to people of Earth. What a bummer. Aren't we here to hear about extra something or other, torrentials, flying around, a craft? Nobody's going to tell you this stuff. And Billy has been trying to tell us for a long time. For a long time. And it doesn't matter what age we're at. My age, younger people, we have our lives, we have them here. And this is going to go somewhere because we're not going to leave you in wide-eyed terror or feeling helpless and hopeless, impotent. There is a reason for this level of reality to be presented. Now here you see this quote about even when the North American continent will be stricken by the most terrible catastrophe, they're going to continue with the warring stuff. That is the Yellowstone caldera. And all of you probably know, in the news within the last couple of weeks, more and more activity has started to occur at Yellowstone. Does it mean it's going to blow next week? Nobody really knows. They may know, but they're not telling us when. But Meier was told 70 years ago about at that time, coming quakes and eruptions in central Italy. They named them Mount Etna, Stromboli, Mount Marsili, Vesuvius, the Campi Flegrei, huge caldera in central Italy, the Eiffel caldera, Eiffel Fields in northern Germany, and Yellowstone. These are three major areas where there's going to be mammoth, no pun intended, eruption and disruption and shakes and quakes. So why do we hear about this? Because it means that if we start paying attention, we start seeing things appearing in the news. We have over 200 now confirmed and verified specific examples of Meier's prophetically accurate information. Ironclad. Forget the UFOs are real, great. We have 200 plus examples with more every week because things are moving along. There are submarine volcanoes that ring the planet. Meier's told 70 years ago by his first teacher, these will start to erupt in the third millennium. Parts of continents will go into the sea. A lot of change is coming. And of course, in this right here, we're also told about computerized weapons becoming independent, cannot be controlled any longer by human beings. Are we not already hearing about robotics and AI and people like Elon Musk and the late Stephen Hawking and other people talking about the danger of autonomous robotic artificial intelligence and the weapons? People, this was published for the second time 31 years ago by a one-armed guy living up in the mountains in Switzerland. Not Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk. We have got to leave behind the phantasmagoria that Meier described in 1958 that we are bombarded with on the internet, movies, television, everywhere. Make-believe, make-believe, make-believe. Oh, terrible things happen, make-believe. That's why when people are confronted with this, very often they glaze over. Who wants to hear this, let alone think that it could be true that America and Russia will clash with violent force, and even Canada will be dragged into it when the Russian attacks the attack force goes into Alaska and Canada. In this document, they tell you where Russia's going to move their troops. 15 years or more, 20 years or more, the Russians moved their troops to that specific location. Computer-controlled weapons, enormous natural catastrophes, rolling walls of fire, which just also, we had already some of that up here in Northern California. Rolling walls of fire. Violent hurricanes, more to come. And then they speak about the great cities being destroyed. And they said in 1975, and again in 2012, Meier was told, the superpower USA could come to an end after 2020 if nothing in this country changes for the better. Now, there's something about this that's interesting. Superpower USA is United States of America. But 1975, they tell them again in 2012, in 1981 and 1987, Meier is told and tells us that there are civil wars coming to America. When I read the first warning from 81, I read it in about 86 or 87, I laughed. What are you talking about? Who's this guy in Switzerland with civil wars coming to America? We are in the beginning now of that phase. There's no doubt about it. You will see more of those things. What leads to civil wars, among other things, are political machinations. The ongoing polarization of people, racial, cultural, religious, you name it, political. So people are encouraged to oppose each other more and more strenuously, stridently, and inflexibly. There's no talk of reason. That's what politics does. It doesn't matter what part of politics you're in. Politics, I remember when I was young, people said, politics is the art of the possible. I've learned that politics is the art of advantage. Politics, diplomacy, it's all lying to manipulate somebody for something that you want and just how far you're going to go to get what you want. Politics is manipulation. And you just see it all the time. I'll build that, I'll go along with you building that bridge there if you put this pork processing plant over here in there. You've compromised. Is this worth doing on its own or not? Let's have unanimity. Either everybody's for it or they're not. A real democracy. How about that project? Should that plant be there? Let's consider it on its own merits. Well, my candidate, my party, we're done. Once that happens anywhere, you're done. You will end up in more and more and more and more conflict, always. That's where we're at right now. Religious delusion. Are there good things about religions? Of course. Are there things about religions that go to extreme and that are corrupting of logic and thinking? Yes, there are. So where do you find yourself with so many people with so many different beliefs and all? And I like to tell this story because it's a true ongoing story for me in my life. Where I live, I've got a friend, he's 55 or so. Young guy, he's up there where we live, and he's got some nice property. We sit on his porch in the warm weather, we watch the grass grow, and we hear the frogs, they're still going, and the crickets and all that. And he's a lifelong Mormon. Completely different place that he come from than that I do. And every now and then, like clockwork, every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, how come you and I get along so well? We come from such different, and he knows I'm not religious. He can't say religion. I say, okay, cosmologies, right? Yeah, cosmology. I said, here's the reason. I'm going to illustrate it for you. This is your cosmology, and this is my cosmology. They seem to be different. However, when you bring them together in the center, there's an overlap. There's a little window in there. where our common values overlap. They're the same. Love, peace, freedom, harmony, service to the community, family, compassion, generosity, understanding, wisdom, reasonable, right? Yeah. He said, you know, I've read that Billy Meier stuff you put out. I don't really disagree with anything. I said, that's great. And I don't have to convert you to something. You don't have to convert me. We still are hanging out with our common values. Now, I went to an event up where I live, Flagstaff, Arizona. There's a place that holds on Friday nights once a month. They hold a meeting for people who belong to a group of religion called the Baha'i. I don't know if any of you, yeah, you've heard of it, right? So, you know, pretty benign sounding stuff for the most part. There's always something you learn about it. Okay, the Baha'i people they're an offshoot of Islam. They are more prominent in Iran. They're persecuted like crazy by the other Muslims. They get some really bad treatment. However, you know, many of the tenets of their belief system would fit right in the center there. Other things don't. So I went to these meetings at this little coffee house for about a year and a half simply to hear what people had to say, where we had the overlap, right? So one day there was a fellow there from Iran, a nice cultured guy, probably middle-aged. He was talking about some art and all this stuff, and I decided to talk to him a little bit, and I was inspired to tell him the following. I said to him, I have absolutely no respect for your beliefs, and I hope you feel the same way about mine. I like what you talk about, I like your values, and I like your artwork. I don't have to like your beliefs. Somebody's going to convert to another religion, oh man, now I've got to go and have respect for those beliefs. I respect people. Beliefs simply means something that someone holds as true without any real evidence. You cannot vet it, it's not scientific. It's fine. There's all sorts of beliefs, but I want to know who you are, because there may be people that even quote-unquote believe or think the Meier case is great, but maybe they don't live the values, and I'd have less in contact with them in practice than I would with people of a religion that I wouldn't want to belong to, but who happen to live the good parts of it all. So what leads to civil war is this extremism, is the polarization. The wackos on the left and the wackos on the right, because they've polarized themselves. I'm left, I'm right. And we already see they will clash against each other come a certain time, and everybody else is collateral damage. And the country then breaks up. Now, in 2008, the play Aaron told Meier a couple of things, and what precipitated this information was that Meier asked who was going to be the presidential nominee for the Democrat Party in 2008. Would it be Hillary Clinton or would it be Barack Obama? And they said, well, Clinton will never become president. That was interesting. It wasn't what he asked. He wanted to know who the nominee would be. But they said she will never become president. And they then said, of course, Barack Obama will be the nominee. She would have unleashed a completely devastating and unprovoked nuclear war with Russia, and we'd all literally be toast here. By now, a year and a half later, whatever it is. That would have been pushed forward by the various, whether you call it shadow, deep state, whatever. Those people, many of whom are apolitical, they're not necessarily on the left or right or Democrat or Republican. They are power-oriented people who simply pursue that however it's necessary. This is not really, shouldn't be coming to anybody as a surprise. Meier had been asked about Barack Obama, and basically he said, well, you know, his assessment was that certainly before the end of Obama's terms, that he was the best man, the best human being ever to occupy the office. And then when it came to the end of his term, he said, unfortunately, like virtually everybody before him, he was turned in the direction of the real behind-the-scenes power of the United States. The president is not the power. So he fronts for the political and the deep state shadow government, and he will do what he is told. So the drone strikes and all this stuff that happened towards the end of Obama's term, Obama had become a different person. And it's not mystical that, you bring in your new president and you sit him down, you put on an old projector and you say, this is called the Zapruder film. See the guy in that open limousine? His name was Jack Kennedy. There he is, sitting with Jacqueline. Now watch what happens here. Isn't that terrible? Poor guy, just blown away. So, Mr. President, do we have your cooperation? And that's it. And you notice that when these presidents come in with families, they're all the more vulnerable to manipulation, because all somebody has to do is point to a kid and say, nice family you have, okay, what do you want? I know it sounds cynical, but here's what the Play Iron had to say 5 months before the election about Trump. First of all, they told Meier at the time, they said the next president in America it's going to be a surprise, because it's going to be this man named Trump. And Billy said, oh, you know, I should probably, they said, no, you don't write about that. You don't mention it because he'll be killed if you do. He'll be killed before he gets in office. Huh? Yeah, well, it's just the way it works over there. He's not really a Republican. He's a one-man party unto himself. He's chaotic, catastrophic human being, but otherwise he's well-meaning, not bad. He cares really for his people in his country, however he appears to people. He wants a peaceful political, military, and economical agreement with other parties, especially Russia. And there's that danger from the power-hungry schemers, as was the case with Obama. Believe me, with the Bushes, you don't have to coerce them. They're already on that page of, you know, wanting the power and all the rest. But they also told him, in June of 2016, there will be false post-election machinations from opponents who will try to force him from office by trumping up, no pun intended, concocted claims of conspiring with the Russians or whatever that have no foundation in truth. Any fair-minded person, you don't have, look, who likes Trump's environmental policies? Who likes his healthcare policy? The guy's got some really, really bad ideas, as they also said right here. Wrong regarding climate change and healthcare, but could change. He'll change other positions. Okay, so vote him out. But no, the will of the people, the majority, however it worked, who elected this guy, we don't have to like him. He was elected. Okay, start your campaign to unseat him. No, we're going to appoint a special counsel who will do any and everything possible to get this guy removed. Well, okay. Is that how a democracy works? The deceitful Democrat deep state deception. And in order for this to happen, deceitful machinations will be initiated after the election in order to prove allegedly false election results by which Trump has illegally won his office. However, what will result of this planned deception, this we've not yet fathomed, which is why I cannot give any details to this. So we will see. We are living in a very interesting historical time. Whatever happens, whether we like this guy, this woman, that one, this party, that, we're living in some very, very potent times. Now, here's a video. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but maybe you'll be able to read the subtitles. And if not, we'll kind of, if anybody doesn't get enough of the idea at the end, we'll encapsulate it. This was from a couple years ago when I interviewed Billy.
Amerikaner und EU versuchen Russland kaputt zu machen. Putin, der sagt nichts, der schweigt einfach dazu. Und Amerika und Europa sagen einfach immer, Russland will angreifen, Krieg machen und so weiter, alles Blödsinn. Russland hat keine Idee, um Krieg zu machen. Wer Krieg zu machen versucht, ist EU und Amerika. Das hat... Weißt du, es hat in EU viele verrückte Leute, genauso wie in Amerika. Und in Amerika die Minorität, du weißt, was Minorität ist, die Minorität muss schweigen, kann nichts dazu sagen. Es ist das Gros, die regieren und die Feindschaft schaffen und so weiter und so fort und Waffenindustrie erhalten wollen und alles das. Und das Minorität im amerikanischen Volk kann rein nichts dagegen tun. Und die müssen dann auch darunter leiden, wenn über Amerika geschumpfen wird. Wenn etwas gesagt wird, das nicht gut ist über Amerika, müssen die dann eben auch darunter leiden. Oder? Und das ist das, was eben sehr schlecht ist. Denn diejenigen, die Minorität, die nichts tun kann, oder die kann nur die Faust im Sack machen, mehr nicht. Und die Menschen, die nicht einverstanden sind mit dem, was gemacht wird, mit Krieg führen, Todesstrafe und all das, die müssen darunter leiden. Die können rein gar nichts machen. Und wenn irgendetwas ist draußen in Amerika geschimpft wird, weißt du, schlechte Worte gebraucht werden für Amerika, dann werden diese automatisch mit einbezogen. Weißt du, und ich denke, meine Meinung, wenn Clinton hinkommt, Hillary Clinton, dann ist der Teufel los, genauso wie bei Bush und so weiter. Und sie ist ja Befürworterin für Todesstrafe, Death Penalty.
Ja.
Dann kommt es auch schlimm in Amerika, genau wie bei Bush. Und ich denke, wenn Trump hinkommt, ist genauso blöd. Ich glaube, das sind zwei, die überhaupt nichts taugen für Präsidentschaft. Ja, ja. Weißt du, und das macht ganz Amerika kaputt.
Ja.
Oder?
Was anybody unclear about the essence of what he was saying there? Putin doesn't want war with the United States. These are machinations from the EU, which Meier foretold in 1958, 11 years before it was formed. This is Merkel, who has opened the door to the migrant crisis in Europe, which will result largely in the fall of Europe to radical Islam. The EU, NATO, the US, they want to provoke the war with Russia. Putin doesn't want it. When we launched those missiles the other night, had Putin wanted to, he could have sunk the battleships and all the rest of it. They didn't do anything. They just held back. That may or may not be a good thing, but they did that. We need to promote understanding, seek cooperation, focus ourselves on common values, a little illustration, and study the spiritual teaching so that we become more of the spiritual teaching people. Now, what does it really mean? What are we talking about? The spiritual teaching is the core reason for the Meier context, for these people coming to earth. It is a non-religious, belief-free teaching. So if you want to study electronics, if you want to study auto repair, if you want to learn how to make something from a recipe book, you pick up your instructional, you pick up your book, you study it. Then you test the information to see if it does what it says, if it shows you how. How to become more peaceful, more prosperous in every real sense, not just materialistically, happier, more balanced in all those ways. So what Meier's mission has been, apart from all this information, the scientific information, the prophecies and all that, the prophecies were intended to warn us of what happens should we ignore the prophecies and should we not turn our attention to the right way to live, even as a book called The Way to Live, the might of the thoughts. So when we come to the spiritual teaching, what does that mean? If it's not religious, what's it about? Well, let's take just a couple of the basic principles in the spiritual teaching. The first one is that we, each and every one of us, are 100% responsible for our own lives. It doesn't mean that we're not interdependent with people. It doesn't mean that some action by somebody else who's careless doesn't affect us. It means that for the greater part of everything in our lives, we are self-responsible, which is a very liberating thought. If there's nobody hovering above us waiting to dip us in hot lead when we die, or send us to a purgatory or an imaginary devil or whatever, if we don't have that fear looming, and we realize that the heaven and earth are that which we create in the here and now, in our lives. So that the worst case is you do the best you can, live this life right. Whatever happens or doesn't happen after we pass from this world is another matter, but we've done it right when we're here. And that just means doing to the best of our knowledge, the best of our ability to live in harmony with certain universal truths and laws of this universe, of this creation, which is the consciousness and the source of everything that exists in life. There are rules and orders for everything. It didn't just happen by accident. And, according to the information in the spiritual teaching, it didn't happen as a result of an act from some deity. And you know, in all the religions, there's lots of different gods. They're saying, no, this universe, this, they call it the creation. This is the source, this is the intelligence, and everything that exists within it, and it exists within everything too. Every human being has an immortal, eternal part called the human spirit. Different than what we call the soul, which is a temporary construct that they say is most accurately called the psyche. Okay, well, let's get back to that self-responsibility thing. What does that mean? It means we have to learn to see things also as they are. Not as we want them to be, not as we fear they may be, but first as they are. Then, when we are taking responsibility, seeing things as they are, for better or for worse, we then choose what we want to do through that part of us that actually creates everything in our lives. And that's through the might of our thoughts. We are thinking 24/7. Awake or asleep, there are thoughts going through the mind. The thing is, very often, we're not even aware that we are thinking. It's so habitual, that little voice in our head that's us, we don't even notice that we're actually doing that. And here's the kicker. Every thought gives rise to a feeling of varying intensity, specificity, nature. Every feeling that's been birthed by a thought gives rise yet to another little thought that leads us to decide if and how we will act or not act. So, when we look at something, we are thinking, even if we're not really conscious of it. We're thinking, and then we're feeling a certain way, and then we're thinking what we're going to do about it, or what we're not going to do about it. And this is 24/7 in life. If you look around in this room, everything but the people in it, I don't think the plants are real, so everything but the people in this room, inanimate stuff, is all thought made manifest. Human beings thought about and thought up and created all of this. The chair you're sitting on, the clothing that you're wearing, shoes on your feet, this, that, and everything. This is what human beings do. We think. Some of us carry the thoughts farther. We get a feeling. We think. We create. We act. But we're doing that either consciously or unconsciously all the time. So extraterrestrials came here to tell us that we're thinking? Well, they're telling us that our thinking is really screwed up, or our world would not look like this. If we were thinking clearly and straightly, if we were aware that we're thinking and of what we're thinking, and learning to control and observe our thoughts so that we can control them, our lives would be very different. As a matter of fact, it's even true now that our lives are different than they would have been or were before in many ways. Many people can say, you know, I remember years ago it was pretty rough, this, that, and the other thing. Well, how did you get here? Well, I thought about it. We are doing it. What this spiritual teaching is, and what it does is it clearly, without frills, without threats or intimidation, without pompous language, it teaches sentence by sentence how we work and how we test out how we work by studying, thinking about it, testing it out. If you go, well, wait a minute, I've been reading that, it doesn't work for me, that's fine, because this is not mandatory. You're not going to be punished by anybody for not studying the spiritual teaching. A ton of this material is available for free online, and then Meier has written over 55 books, all pertaining to the spiritual teaching, how human beings work. There's almost anything you can think about is somehow covered in this material, because it's a gift to humankind, facilitated by more advanced brothers and sisters, if you will, from the stars, who've gone through what we've gone through on their journey and their evolution. They had to learn, as we do, how to survive themselves and their own insanity. Their forefathers, they've had space travel for more than hundreds of thousands of years in their genealogy. Some of their ancestors were like Star Wars on steroids. They knew all sorts of stuff. They had high tech. Many of them were very spiritually developed, but they used it the wrong way. There's no perfect space brothers out there. There are only other beings evolving on their worlds, some of whom have developed the ability to leave their worlds and plunge out to seek out other life in the universe. Some are better, some are not. Some are more advanced and developed than we, some are not. These people, at least so far after 76 years, they haven't attacked us. They haven't harmed us. They haven't given us bad information. There have been no lies that we can find. They've given us something that we look at and we say, well, if that physical evidence is real and we can determine it from all the analyses, we can now do our own analyses using computer stuff. If the prophecies are accurate and we can check that out for ourselves by doing online searches, then there's a reason for it. They're saying is, well, here it is. If you think that there's enough credibility to all the warnings, all the information we've given you, we and Meier, as a source for this for you people of Earth, basically freely given, would you take our advice and at least look at what we've brought you? The spiritual teaching. Don't get hung up if you don't like the word spiritual. The teaching, the information, and play with it at any time in your life that you find it. You're neither too old, and in most cases, not too young either. Young children aren't going to find or understand it. When they're curious enough, they may ask about it. It's not to be forced on them. You don't drag them, as some religions will have you do, drag children to church from early age and pound into beliefs. There's nothing to believe here. Cause and effect. An immutable law of the universe, and they discuss it in great depth and detail and show us how it works and how to deal. There's another element, there's so many. One of the elements that I love is the element of striving. Having something you move towards, that you're going to strive. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. It could be to add something to a collection that you've got, to write some poems, to whatever it is. But human beings need to strive towards something. Or they stagnate, they become unhappy with themselves, they don't know why, they become depressed or anxious. Because they're not inspired, they're not fired up from within by themselves to strive for things. A lot of the people would say, well, wait a minute, most of the things you're saying is kind of like common sense. It's pretty uncommon though, isn't it, common sense? Some of it is, physics is common sense too. Cause and effect is common sense. When we know that, when we've seen that in operation, bounce the ball, throw it out, bounces, comes back. Then when they say, well, that's how things work, because it's thought, goes out, and it brings back, and things come up from inside you, things approach you from the outside, you make choices, you experiment, you make mistakes. You have to make mistakes. How are we going to learn? We're not perfect. We're going to go, I'm doing this and it always works here, and I did that and that works, and it's all perfect. We wouldn't learn, we wouldn't grow, we wouldn't be troubled, we wouldn't be tossed around like a raw gem in a tumbler to be polished. We have to have the friction, we have to have the opposition, we have to have the stimulation from other people and events, pleasant and unpleasant. History is full of these things. So at this time in our history, here we've looked at just a little of some of the unpleasant things that now are not quite so unimaginable, they're not so vague, they're not so, they're kind of on our doorstep. But that doesn't mean we have to be panicked and taken by surprise by everything, because when we do know, okay, we can now see the next time you open up your browser for the news or a newspaper or a magazine and you hear the next thing and the why didn't somebody warn us, you already know, well, that's probably because of this. And that will lead to this, and now you start to see the future for yourself. It doesn't take extraterrestrials or prophets any longer when we start to understand how things really work. Not how the bombardment of materialism constantly coming through our media, not the bombardment of outright fear and destruction that we get everywhere, and the bombardment of entertainment and celebrities and all the distractions, but how things work. So you think of yourself, well, I'm just an ordinary person. I'm nobody special in the world. That's fine. How can I change it? Well, let's be honest here, folks. There's a lot in motion that we are not going to be able to change any longer. When I started to do a lot of this representation of this material, I've been at this for almost 40 years, I said my mission is to help prove the prophecies wrong. Huh? How do you prove them wrong? By enough people recognizing, paying attention, testing, thinking, and saying, no, I don't want that to happen. So we're kind of in a place where what you don't know, what I haven't said is, this material, the reason you haven't heard most of it, or the in-depth stuff, and much that I haven't covered, is because there is, and has been for over 50 years, a concerted, very well organized, behind-the-scenes effort to keep the people of the world from knowing this. It's conducted by parties who are very powerful and have great technologies, and what they do largely also now is broadcast through computers, through the phone that you have on yourself, your tablet, your computer, your television, your radio, frequencies and things that are intended to disrupt our consciousness, our focus, and subliminal messages to promote hatred, fear, anxiety, and all of that. Not to inform, so that we can go and ask that question, well, what do I do? Because most of the stuff that's being done to us that is subliminal bombards us and hits us on the unconscious or subconscious levels. And we don't know why we're feeling especially irritated. We don't know why things get seemingly so stressful with everybody. And there are contributing factors to it that are outside of your control. There are some things you can do to protect against it. I'm not trying to do a commercial. There is a device you can wear that actually does protect against a lot of this stuff. Actually scientifically tested. And I'll give you my card, you can look it up and all that. But I don't sell it, somebody else does. But that's only one part. You still have to take responsibility for the thinking and how you feel about things and what you're going to do. Are you going to go, oh, well, okay, that was some presentation, and I prefer not to. Yep, we'll probably show that in a minute. I'll put show. Are we going to just try to forget about this bad news element that on a nice Sunday afternoon we went from lovely UFO photos to this, and then to being told that there's a spiritual teaching? The spiritual teaching people simply means those people that gravitate towards and involve themselves in the discovery, the critical thinking of this material, and allowing that to be, that they test it, and then they discern in their own lives how this is affecting the quality of their life. And what you will find, what you've already found in many ways, you know this is true. When you have a common area of interest with other people, people start to find each other. And you don't have to, it's not like everybody has to find Billy Meier and his material for like-minded good people to come together who are concerned about the environment. Climate change, anybody know about that? Who do you think the first person was to specifically warn about it? Billy Meier in 1951. Unnatural, man-made climate change, global warming, the dangerous destruction from the extraction of petroleum, natural gas, and mining of ores. How this imbalances the plates and our planet. Meier. And he was told this stuff when he was a kid. He's 14, he gets help from a school teacher, and they send letters all over the world. Nobody pays attention. Who warned about the 2 U.S. wars with Iraq? The second war would be led by a president who would be the son of a former president in 1958. Billy Meier specifically foretold AIDS by name, plastic credit cards, portable cell phones, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the rise of irrepressible worldwide Islamist terrorism. 1958, Billy Meier. 1981, warning about the attacks in France. There's a professor, a skeptical professor up at NAU where I live. Met him one day, told him I had some interesting information. He said, well, you know, I'm a tough nut to crack, but I'll take a look. After 4 months, he invited me to make the first of the 2 presentations at the university there. And before the first presentation, he sent me an email, November 17th, I think it was, 2015. He said, guess what I told my wife yesterday after the attacks in Paris? That's when those terrible attacks took place, he said, I already knew this was coming. Thank you, Michael. Because I sent him Billy Meier's information warning from 1981 about forthcoming attacks in Paris. We haven't seen by a long shot the end of that stuff. But we don't have to visit all the bad news. Now we have to decide, okay, there's a lot of bad news, he didn't show us all of it, okay, I don't want to know everything. But I do want to know how I can start to galvanize my own, life, motivate myself, protect myself and those I love in the best way possible. That isn't always, sure, you can have a gun or a knife or whatever you have as a self-defense tool, but it's how you think. And the consciousness that you hold where you start to see, and this is where the spiritual teaching is so good, because when you realize from studying this really about what you are as a human being, an inspirited human being, and then you just gaze around at everybody, oh, so-and-so over there, you realize that every so-and-so over there is a universe unto themselves just like you are, on their own evolutionary path, unfolding, evolving in each lifetime as a different, unique personality, learning and learning and learning over countlessly long periods of time till we are back, as it were, as the spirit, remerging with the spiritual energy that is this creation, billions of years from now. So we're not worrying about, I'm not going to worry about past lives, I'm not going to worry too much about what happens in a million years from now. I want the quality of this life to just be really good. I want to really return to who and what I was kind of when I came into this life with a fairly clean slate, and I've had a lot of stuff that's come my way and imprinted itself on me as a human being on earth during these ever-troubling times. But the beauty of life is accessible through the mind, through the eyes, through the breath, and through the self-created peace, and the recognition of each human being as the same independent little universal energy walking around as you are, as we are, as I am. The thing is, we don't have to like everybody. We can more easily love everybody than we can like them. And that's really an interesting thing to experience. When you can look at somebody, let's say you've got somebody who's been just a thorn in your side for the longest time. When they don't notice it, you just look over and you go, another human being with a spirit within them of the same value in life as me. Couldn't be more irritating to me, couldn't be more of a problem to me, but dang, how can I not love that being? Do I like him? No. Do I want to go back and sit down to him? No, it's not required. You can hold that love, and you find yourself, as you move through life, then everybody you meet, everyone becomes this story. To whatever degree we read the book, in any moment or any period of time we're with people, here's the story of a life. Billy wrote an article, to be of equal value. And when I read that, I went, wow. Because he was saying, there's almost 9 billion people on this planet, not 7 or 8. We're overpopulated, another story. It's really the cause of all our problems, but it's a hot button for people to think about it. It's not right now what I'm going to talk about. But he spoke about, to be of equal value, you have to recognize that each human being is inspirited. Now, does that mean that everybody has the same abilities, the same status, the same accomplishment? No. But intrinsically, it doesn't matter in the material life whether you have been cleaning floors for 45 years as an occupation, that's been it for you. In some way, you know more than the scientist who has the answers to certain things of greater magnitude, who knows more than somebody else who's above him, and less in another area. We don't need to compare ourselves. We are of equal value. So if we are of equal value, and we know that, we seek to find the way to harmonize. When Billy says the cornerstones, peace, love, freedom, and harmony. So when you have a note, and if you hear it, oh, it's a dissonant note, well, how do you create a harmonic? to it? How do you find the other note that vibrates in harmony with it? And the two of you create that overlap. That's an adventure unto itself. That can happen at a table, sitting around for coffee with people and you're talking. And you're not having to preach to people. You're not trying to change people. In that state of understand, when we can actually start to understand other people, Billy says, to understand another person is to love them. Because you've backed away from impulsive judgment, criticism, all the first impressions, right? Or the carried impressions from previous experiences with people. Have you ever run into somebody you hadn't seen in a long time, they had been kind of an enemy or opponent, thorn in your side, but for some reason, you're glad to see each other. And you didn't bring that stuff. You might remember that you used to be butting heads, but you both have been through enough of life that there's something about, you get it, even on a wordless level, another human being. Wow, I remember when we were just banging our heads together, pushing each other over every opportunity. And now I'm just grateful to see you. Nice to see you too. It does something to us in a moment. It's so transformative, where we're not always ready to, for conflict. And it isn't even completely our fault that we're so ready for conflict, because, as we will learn in the Meier case, more than 22 million years ago, according to this information, our very distant forefathers in another star system genetically modified a race of human beings to become very willing and able warriors to protect them. And what they did with these people was to reduce their lifespans by a factor of 10 to 15, down from 1,000 or 1,500 years, which was the natural birthright, down to 100 years or less, and they increased the propensity for violence and aggression. Every human being on Earth, since those people were brought here a long time ago, has inherited those two genetic manipulations. Why are we so quick to anger? Why do we feel like, I'm feeling old and I'm only whatever? We will regain the long lifespans. The scientists are actually working on that, and according to Play and they've made certain inroads. We won't hear about it for a while, but the next bump up, the average age will be 145, not 72 or 78, whatever. There's lots of good stuff coming, and in about 800 years, according to this information, after we've gone through all the stuff that we go through, how much ever it's going to be, human beings will have fully come to embrace the spiritual teaching, the essence of love, peace, freedom, and harmony, getting along with each other. And the power at that time will be in the hands of the women, the true mothers of the new millennium. That's in here, that it will be the women in the future who, because they are much more naturally predisposed to reason, to love, peace, harmony, and freedom, they bear the children, the nurturers. But it isn't just that. That happens to be a royal position in and of itself, but they will be able to turn the tide of the insanity of the machismo that we keep on passing down. There's nothing wrong with being a strong male and be a warrior if you need to, but we are on hair trigger and we're encouraged to that. You watch the movies and the TV shows and all that stuff these days, it's created by, featuring psychopaths. I can barely think of a show, maybe if not psychopaths, then you've got, the men are always idiots in situational comedies, or it's psychopathic. I don't care what show it is. I just watch Netflix and stuff, I go from show to show, I go, this is all psychopaths. Nothing but bloodshed and murder and mayhem. Very little thinking involved in solving any problems. Everybody pulls out a gun or a knife, or blood is flying everywhere now, it's all gratuitous. The women will be the main force to reverse that trend, and it's going to take time. It's really going to take some time, but we will then regain our senses and have developed the technologies to repair the damage on Earth, to the seas, to the air, to the water, everything. All the lands, the fruits, the trees, animals, the creatures that we are wiping out, species just willy-nilly every day, disappearance of species. This all comes back to the might of the thoughts, the spiritual teaching, the focus on true eternal values, love, peace, freedom, harmony, understanding, reasonableness, knowledge, wisdom, compassion. These are words that exist for a reason, folks. They are not the things that our societies any longer emphasize and bring to the forefront for us. It isn't the education our children are getting anywhere, except maybe in some of the better private schools, I don't know. But this is the education for humankind, brought to us by man on earth, who received a lot of it from these good folks who learned it themselves and have, for 52,000 years, they say, they've maintained peace in their worlds. They gave up their other way of behaving and had decided to embrace truth, 52,000 years ago. And that's how they live. Do they use money? No. Well, what do? You can have whatever you want, but you have to give back to the society. Every day, you must contribute 2 hours of your time for the betterment of everybody else. And then you need something, you want it. Who cares? It's not like here where we're climbing over each other for pieces of paper or plastic cards or metal coins or imaginary currencies or whatever we do. Because we worship stuff and we try to amass. If you can have what you need, what you want, and all you have to do is give of yourself, well, what do you have to amass? There's no scarcity. It goes on. And this is what our world will eventually come to be when we, as evolving human beings, in our subsequent lives as well, because once you've heard about this, in subsequent lives, you will find it again. So it's not like, well, why should I even stop? It's not even, we have 5 minutes, so we're going to wrap it. Does anybody have a question at this point?
Actually answer a question outside, if we...
Questions outside we can do, sure, we can do that. In the meantime, there is a great body of free information. It's available from my website, my blog, and those that are linked from them. We have, if you want, we do have DVDs, and I have one DVD. It's a workshop, so you can learn how to do a process in the spiritual teaching for yourself just by putting a DVD in, and you're guided through the steps. We have that. We have films on the UFO focus part of this. All this stuff, if you want. And yes.
Yeah. How this kind of greed-related function of capitalism, blah, 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 that we have, is able to keep such a power kind of thing going, because it's so powerful as far as energy and ego and all that, and that allows them to remain on top.
Well, let me just say this. Very valid points, right? What we want to do, because this is one of the many valid points we can be concerned about in our world, the power of capitalism and control and all the rest. But there's another thing. We return to the idea here of each person having dominion and sovereignty over their own thoughts and feelings, and learning how to best navigate and contribute to positive change. We don't overthrow things, certainly overnight. You're not going to make the world suddenly behave in a truly just and wonderful way, but it is through conscious living and adherence to good principles, not out of coercion or fear or guilt. This means that you are no less empowered. When you leave here, you should decide if you want to be more empowered as your own decision. And if so, how you're going to go about that. I highly recommend studying this material. As I say, a lot of it's free on my website. I have a shop with the books that Billy goes into everything in depth. But all you need to do is grasp something here. Think about it. Grasp something there. Think about it. Try. It's learning anything. These big issues, all the stuff we showed there, the way things are going to roll because the mass of humanity didn't get this in time. Not through the fault of the player, not through the fault of Meier, because those people who hunger for control and power made sure they did everything they could, and this was written about recently. It's in the German website, they talked about it. This is how it's suppressed. But it won't stop the snowball that has started to go down the hill that will gather momentum and become larger and larger and larger. This takes time. But in our individual lives, we can choose to be happy for no reason. What do we need something to be happy about? You're alive, you can take a breath. I like that. Let's start there. Why not? Start wherever you are and look for the reasons to be happy. Look for the reason that what nature teaches us. They are very simple about it. You want to understand the creation? Seek to see it in everything. Look at nature, the way nature operates. Nature doesn't operate through excess, through senses of lack. It has order, it has seasons, it has cycles. It has ups and downs and it flows, but the tree that is barren in the winter comes back alive in the springtime. So let that be us too, okay? Thank you. If there's any questions, we can take it out there. All right.